I'm Dr. Sandler. I'm a psychologist here at Fairfield. Today we're talking about pain and thoughts. So the first thing to understand is that pain is biopsychosocial. You can see the diagram there on the right with the three overlapping circles, and that is the idea that chronic pain there in the middle is not just biological or physical, it is biological, psychological, and social. So pain is very real, but it is also very complex. One thing to understand is that chronic pain is not imaginary. So a lot of people might say, even doctors sometimes say things like your pain is just in your head. Well, I'm here to say that if you have pain, that pain is real. It's not made up. It's not imagined. However, the stuff in your head, all those thoughts, all those beliefs you have, your psychology, in other words, that stuff actually does matter. So, to say that there's a psychological aspect to chronic pain doesn't mean we're saying you're making it up or you imagine. What we mean is that all of your thoughts and your moods and your beliefs, all of those things affect your experience of pain. Again, this is really important to understand that pain is more than just a physical thing. It's not just biological. This is what a lot of medical doctors believe, and they treat you as if your pain is purely physical, right? So they'll give you, medications, they'll surgery, things like that, but they don't really address the psychological or the social aspects of chronic pain. We know now that chronic pain is best understood not as physical, but as biopsychosocial, acknowledging the physical factors, the biological factors, in other words, as well as the psychological or mental, and also the social factors. So if we ignore some of these aspects, we're going to be leaving out part of the picture. Today, we're talking about thoughts and pain, and thoughts and beliefs are part of the psychological aspect of biopsychosocial, this bottom right circle here. So when you see biopsychosocial, the psycho doesn't just mean psycho, like a psychotic person, it means psychological and refers to your thoughts, your beliefs, and your moods. We have to recognize that this aspect of pain, the psychological aspect, is really important. And since it's so important in creating our pain and our experience of pain, that we can't ignore it. We have to treat all of these aspects, both physical and mental health, both mind and body. Without one of those, it is incomplete. We know that mind and body are not separate, they are interconnected in every possible way. So, our thoughts and our beliefs are not just kind of floating out there in our mind, they have a profound impact on our body, on our pain, and on our ability or likelihood to recover. So, thoughts and beliefs are very important to address. So, let's talk about thoughts. How we think about things, in particular, how we think about pain, affects how we feel about pain, and it affects how we behave or how we act in response to pain. If we're having a lot of negative thoughts, like you're angry, you're frustrated, you're sad, you're worried, you're afraid, all of these are negative thoughts. And we know that they intensify our pain perception. In other words, they turn our pain up. It's as if we're turning up the volume on our pain. Um, and of course, negative thoughts make us more emotionally distressed, right? So when I'm having negative thoughts, I'm certainly not feeling happy and calm. I generally am more upset. So negative thoughts, they make our pain worse and they make us emotionally worse. There's a lot of different types of negative pain-related thoughts, but just a couple examples. One is I simply can't handle this pain. Right? So when you start thinking this way, I can't handle it. I can't handle it. Everything starts to feel very overwhelming and you start to feel bad and you certainly aren't going to be acting much. You're going to be inactive. You might think my life is ruined because of this pain. You start feeling hopeless, feel like you don't have a future. These kinds of thoughts don't just make you feel bad, they actually increase your pain. So if you had a 5 out of 10 pain, you start thinking this way, you start getting upset, it could go up to a 6 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10. So this is basically what we're talking about, that thoughts are interconnected with our feelings and with our actions or our behaviors. Everything is interconnected. So thoughts affect feelings, feelings affect thoughts, thoughts affect actions, actions affect thoughts, feelings affect actions, and actions affect feelings. Everything is a triangle where everything is pointing to one another. And that top category, thoughts, that includes everything we're thinking about. So not just our thoughts, but our beliefs, right? Our beliefs about pain, what pain means, our beliefs about how you're supposed to recover from injuries. Those are our thoughts as well as any thoughts that come up in response to having pain. The feelings includes all of our emotions, all of our moods that arise due to pain, such as just stress or maybe anxiety, a lot of worries, depression, feeling down, feeling a loss of motivation, anger, irritability. All of those things are important to take into account. Then finally, our actions are anything we actually do, any physical action that we do or don't do. So usually we're not doing things. If you're in pain, we're avoiding activity. We're lying down, we're not going out, and things like that. So um, the point here is everything is interconnected. Our thoughts can affect our feelings, our thoughts can affect our actions, and vice versa. So if that's true, we can see how our thoughts, negative thoughts, can lead to negative feelings and unhealthy actions, unfortunately. So we start with a negative thought, like you start thinking, this pain is never going to get better. And I'm always going to have pain. I'm always going to be suffering. It's never going to get any better. If you really believe that thought, if you really have that belief, you're certainly not going to be feeling light and happy and energized. And most people, when you start to think that my pain will never get better, they start to feel very hopeless for the future. Hopeless, even to the point of feeling depression, right? So it can get very bad. And in response, what kind of behaviors are you going to have? Well, someone that is hopeless and depressed, they're certainly not going to go out and be the life of the party. They're not going to go out to the gym and exercise, right? So, as a result of these thoughts, not only are you having these negative emotions of hopelessness and depression, you are also leading to more inactivity. So, you're avoiding social activity, you're avoiding physical activity and exercise. And over time, we know that inactivity and isolation always worsen chronic pain. So all this starts with a negative thought. This pain will never get better, and it leads to behaviors that unfortunately lead us to get even worse. Here's another example. Sometimes people come to our programs or think about exercising again to recondition their bodies, and then they have the thought, if I get on that treadmill, if I exercise, I'm probably just going to hurt myself again. It's a very common thought, a very common fear that you're going to re-injure yourself. But think about it. If you really believe this thought, how are you going to feel? You're looking at a treadmill. Are you going to feel nice and calm? Probably not. You're going to be feeling anxiety, worry. You're going to feel fear. What if I fall off and break my leg again? And frustration, right? I wish I could exercise, but I'm just going to hurt myself. That's what you think. So naturally, as a result, your behavior, you're certainly not going to be getting on that treadmill, right? You are almost certainly going to avoid exercise if you think it's going to hurt you. And if you avoid exercise, it's a very strong likelihood you're avoiding other things. You're avoiding, for example, picking up your grandkids, or you're avoiding going out to dinner with your family. And those things over time, they unfortunately, because of inactivity and isolation, lead to worse chronic pain. So those are negative thoughts, but sometimes we do some work, we do some exercise. Maybe we're in a program like the functional restoration program and we're being exposed to some activity, getting a little stronger, and we feel some pain, of course. But instead of a negative thought, we might have something like this. We might think, yes, I'm in pain, but my pain is nothing to freak out about. My pain levels are because my nervous system is too sensitive. Right? You might tell yourself this. Yep, it's another flare up. Yep, I'm in pain, but it's nothing to get worried about. It's nothing to get upset about. This is normal, and it's part of my nervous system being too sensitive. And the way to desensitize your nervous system is by doing more activity, actually. So if you think this way, you might start to not feel as afraid, not feel as anxious, and feel a bit more calm, a bit more safe. It's okay to feel some pain. I've had 100 flare-ups before. I'll probably get through this one as well. So you start to learn some resilience or strength. You can get through these tough times, and you have confidence in yourself. Even though it hurts, even though it's difficult, you can still know and have confidence in yourself. So if you really think this way, you're going to be much more likely to engage in activities. Pain is nothing to freak out about as a thought, as a belief, is going to make it much more likely for you to go out with your friends and family, much more likely to go for walks and engage in physical exercise and activity in general. So in general, this is just the idea that our thinking, whether negative or positive, it's going to affect our emotions or feelings, and it's going to affect our behaviors or our actions. And um, if it's negative thoughts, we're going to have negative emotions, unhealthy behaviors. If it's positive, we're going to have better emotions and more healthy behaviors. Like I said, negative thoughts lead to this vicious cycle. Negative thinking leads to negative emotions, which leads us to unhealthy behaviors. And again, all of this is connected. So it just makes us think even more negatively. And then that cycle just perpetuates. Our thinking gets more negative, our pain gets worse, and so on and so on and so on. The idea is we need to be altering our negative thoughts about pain to more positive or realistic ones. Not necessarily just, pretending everything is okay, like pretending like the pain isn't there or everything is great. That's not what I'm talking about. And we're talking more about challenging the negative thinking and just being more realistic and having a bit more of a hopeful attitude. So instead of this is the worst pain ever and I can't handle it, you might even say to yourself, well, I've had worse pain and I got through that too. Or you might just tell yourself, I know I can manage my pain if I use the right strategies. Very simple. It's a new way of thinking, less negative, a little more realistic, a little more flexible. The idea is that if we replace our overly negative thoughts with more realistic thinking, it's going to affect, again, our feelings and our actions. So we'll have a better mood, less stress, and we'll also tend to increase our activity. That means we get stronger and we're better able to manage our pain. So when we challenge our negative thinking in all sorts of ways, challenge our negative beliefs, we start to have more realistic positive ones, leading to better mood and more healthy activity. So let's take a step back and think about more about negative thoughts and the negative beliefs that we might have. So some of our least helpful thoughts are actually our negative beliefs about pain itself and our beliefs about recovery. So our beliefs about pain, meaning if we're in pain, what does that mean? And if we're in pain, how are you supposed to recover? People have a lot of beliefs about these things. Some may or may not be true, but they really do end up being some of the most powerful thoughts that we have that can change our recovery for the better or for the worse. The trouble is that pretty much everyone with chronic pain is afraid of having more pain. They're afraid of re-injuring themselves or just their existing pain getting worse, which makes sense. It's a completely understandable pain or understandable belief. If I hurt myself and I'm in pain, I don't want to be in more pain, of course. So we all agree that no one wants pain or re-injury, but the belief that you're afraid of pain, the belief that you're going to be re-injured if you're active, that leads to, unfortunately, some unhealthy behaviors. So, for example, we have something called guarding that happens. So imagine you hurt your right arm and you're really afraid that, if you do the dishes or if you cook, you're just going to hurt your arm even worse. You're going to re-injure it or it's going to get flared up and then you can't use it at all. So people end up doing is they guard their right arm. They don't use it and often compensate with others. For example, just using your left arm. So over time, what's going to happen to your right arm if you're not using it? Well, if you don't use it, you lose it. So over those weeks, months, and years, your pain is going to stay the same, but your arm is going to become deconditioned, which means the muscles and ligaments in your arms become very weak and stiff because you're not using them. So ironically, you're trying to protect your arm by not using it, but over time it actually causes it to become weak and more painful. This process is called fear avoidance, which simply means avoiding things due to fear, specifically the fear of movement due to the belief it will increase pain or possibly re-injure you. So this is one of those processes where we try to protect ourselves by not using our injured body part, but because we're avoiding using it, it gets weaker and stiffer due to deconditioning and becomes even more painful. Why do we do this? It's because normally with short-term injuries, we are supposed to guard ourselves. With short-term acute injuries, you need to protect it and rest. So, for example, if you sprain your ankle, you roll your ankle or something like that, you shouldn't go running on that foot for a while. Right? You should ice it, elevate it, rest it, but only for a few days. So normally it is good to avoid things and rest, but that's only for short-term injuries. Imagine you roll your ankle and 2 months later it's still in pain. 4 months, 6 months later it's still in pain. Well, at that point, now your ankle is getting weaker and weaker over time due to lack of use, and you're actually putting it in more danger of being injured because you're not using it. It's not strong. So this strategy of avoiding things due to fear of re-injury, it makes sense for normal injuries, but it does not make sense for chronic injuries or chronic pain. With chronic pain, you can't just wait to get better. You need to take proactive steps to improve your functionality and quality of life. So for short-term acute injuries, rest is good, but for chronic injuries, we cannot simply rest forever. This leads to people resting for months, even years, and in many ways, they are worse off than when they even started. So with chronic pain, you need to take proactive steps on your own in order to improve your quality of life. The biggest obstacle to this is the fear of activity, the fear of using your injured body part. And that's exactly what you need to do in order to get stronger and healthier. So you say, my arm hurts, so I'm going to avoid lifting anything with it. Again, over time, you won't have much of an arm left. All those muscles will get very small and weak. And because their muscles are weak, you're actually more likely to injure your arm. So, because you're trying to protect your arm, you actually end up weaker and stiffer. Same with the second one. It says, if I get on the treadmill, I'm just going to injure my back again. Well, the truth is that getting on the treadmill, walking again, getting some motion and mobility, that's probably exactly the type of thing that you need to help recover from your back injury. So the point here is that we have these beliefs about pain that are fear-based and they can get in the way of recovery. Pain leads to fear of re-injury. Fear of re-injury leads to avoidance of activity. Avoidance of activity leads to deconditioning. That's the process where our body loses its conditioning or strength over time. And when we're deconditioned, we end up with more pain. When we have more pain, we have more fear, more avoidance, and so on and so forth. It's a vicious cycle that can get worse and worse over time. A lot of us aren't even aware that we have these fear-based beliefs that lead us to be afraid of movement, but the end result is inactivity, deconditioning, and more pain. So by avoiding activity, we perpetuate the cycle of disability. We make ourselves worse and worse over time. I'm going to introduce a few other aspects of negative thinking, and we'll bring them all together at the end. So catastrophizing, as you can see the person in the picture, you can imagine they hear a noise at night, and their first thought is, that must be a monster that's here to eat me, right? So that's an example of catastrophizing. Catastrophizing it's a funny word, but it just means a type of thought where you see small things as really big catastrophes. So in the case of the kid, they just heard a noise outside, they heard a noise in the house, and they jumped to the worst case scenario. It must be a monster, right? What's the truth? Well, probably it's windy outside or the house is creaking or something like that. So catastrophizing is when we always think of a catastrophe. We always think of the worst case scenario. Specifically with chronic pain, that is when the feeling of pain itself, the pain sensation, We feel that, and then we think of the worst case interpretation. So I have a pain in my knee, and I think to myself, I have to go to the hospital right now, or I'm going to lose my knee. I'm going to lose my leg. I'll be paralyzed. Might sound crazy or sound silly, but these are the types of thoughts that we often have in response to pain sensations. So you're going for a walk, your foot starts to hurt. What do you think? Well, most people might think my foot's hurting because I'm going on a walk. I just need to, pace myself, not do as much, maybe. If someone's catastrophizing, they'll think, my foot hurts. I probably broke my foot. My bone's broken. I just ripped a muscle. I probably need surgery. So, catastrophizing here, you got a pain in your foot, and your immediate thought is, I need surgery. That's a good sign that you're catastrophizing. The truth is you're probably just overdid it a little bit. Some people, they get back pain, might lift something, twist weird, get up out of the chair, and your back pain's back. And then people catastrophize that. They think their spine is ripping open, their vertebra fell out of place again, their discs are out of alignment. The truth is that your spine probably did not move around in that moment. Nothing probably ripped or tore or pinched. There's probably just some very sensitive nerves back there. And so when you feel that pain sensation, we often think the worst case scenario, my back is broken. My shoulder is burning, which means I'm tearing apart my arm and eventually I'll be paralyzed and useless. This is a common thought where people have a pain and then they think about, 30 years in the future, if I'm retired, I'm not going to be able to do anything, or I'll be paralyzed by then because I'm not getting any help. These are, again, catastrophic thoughts, right? So the chances are, again, you're probably overdoing it with whatever you're doing, making your shoulder have a burning sensation. And yeah, you might need some adjustments or modifications, but it doesn't require you to freak out that your shoulder is tearing apart and you need to be rushed to the ER. So this is the thing, that those thoughts might sound a little silly, but if you really do believe these catastrophic thoughts, you're going to be too afraid to take the steps you need to get better. So if you think, oh, my spine just fell apart, my disc just fell out and it needs to be pushed back in, you're probably not going to be doing any treadmill. You're not going to be doing any walking, any lifting, right? So these catastrophic thoughts, they contribute to our fear avoidance, along with our fear-based pain beliefs. So catastrophic thoughts and negative fear-based beliefs, those both contribute to our avoidance of activity. One more thing to talk about is hypervigilance. Hyper means too much, and vigilance means to watch. So it means you're watching too closely. So you see the person on the right with their eyes wide open. They're looking for anything at all that they can see. They're paying too much attention. So why do I bring this up? When we have negative fear-based pain beliefs in catastrophizing, our thoughts are catastrophic, they increase our hypervigilance of pain. In other words, they put us on watch for any pain sensation in our body. Like I said, hypervigilance means paying too much attention or being too vigilant. It's kind of like a security guard that spooks at every little sound. So you imagine a security guard, there's like a leaf that falls, there's a tiny little sound. The security guard, he freaks out and he starts yelling, "Who's there?" And he starts shooting at the leaf and things like that. You would say the security guard is a little too hypervigilant, right? They're paying too much attention to every little sound. And they're getting freaked out by everything. That's really not necessary. They only need to pay attention to the important stuff, like if someone's actually breaking in, right? So we have the same process, but it's like we're the security guard. And anytime we have a pain sensation, we freak out about it. And people with chronic pain, they're paying very close attention to their bodies to make sure that nothing is going wrong. So, to give you a better sense of what hypervigilance is like, remember the last time you were cut off in traffic while you're driving, right? Someone cuts you off, and suddenly, your eyes get wide, and you grip the steering wheel really tight, and suddenly you're looking in all your mirrors, and you're aware of everyone around you, right? So you're hyper aware of everything. The difference is that when you get out of the car, that dies down, so that the next time you're in the car, you're not white knuckling the steering wheel. You're back to normal. The difference with chronic pain is that it's like someone cuts you off every day, or someone's cutting you off every hour, and you are constantly hypervigilant, constantly on the lookout for anything that's going on that's wrong. Like I said, hypervigilance fades over time, but constant chronic pain leads to constant activation of hypervigilance. So if we're always hypervigilant, right? Imagine you're in that same mood when you just get cut off. That actually starts to change your nervous system. You become more sensitive, more reactive, more easily startled, more easily afraid, things like that. If we're like this, if we're always paying really, really close attention to our bodies, it's going to make it a lot more likely to catastrophize because we're paying very close attention to our pain sensations and worrying about them. What does that mean? What's that pain mean? What's this new pain? Is this some other problem? And we're always going to think a negative thing. All right, so let's put it all together. I know this diagram looks a little crazy, but we'll go through one by one. Let's start up at the top at the star where it says your injury. Your injury creates your pain experience there in the middle. And then you can see that you can either go left, or you can either go right. And if you go right, that says no fear. I would say low fear. Low fear, because if you have no fear, you're probably dead, right? So low fear, you're able to go right. But then if you go left, that's high fear. And normally, when we have chronic pain, unfortunately, we respond to our pain experience with high fear. So most people, they get that injury, the start up top, and then it creates their pain experience, of course, in the middle. And then they go left to pain catastrophizing, right? So, and that's when we start thinking about our pain in catastrophic ways. That creates pain related fear. And if we're afraid of our pain, if we're afraid we're going to injure ourselves, or we're afraid activity is going to increase our pain in some way, then we are going to have avoidance of activity physically and socially, right? Any kind of physical activity like walking or exercise, as well as just being around other people. It also increases our hypervigilance, as it says here. So our hypervigilance increases, which just makes all of our anxiety and fear worse. The end result of avoidance is disuse, meaning we're not using our body, we're inactive. That leads to depression, right? Depression, if you're inactive and isolated, sitting in your room alone, not doing anything, of course you're going to become depressed after a while. And disability, it reinforces our inability to function, our inability to do things. Unfortunately, it doesn't end there, right? So if we have disuse and depression, those actually filter back into our pain experience and make it even worse. So now our pain experience is worse. We're going to catastrophize more, have more fear, have more avoidance, more deconditioning and depression, and so on. So we get trapped on this left-hand side in this vicious cycle of chronic pain and negative thinking. So like I said, we're going to go through this again real quick. After injury, you have pain. That pain leads to developing the fear-based pain beliefs we talked about, such as I can't exercise or I'll re-injure myself. And we have increased catastrophic thoughts about pain. So that means you're interpreting your pain as the worst case scenario, like I need to go to the hospital or my pain means I'm totally disabled. Negative beliefs and pain catastrophizing lead to more pain related fear. If you have fear, you're going to be more hyper vigilant. You're going to be more on the watch for anything that could threaten you. You make it much more likely to become afraid of your pain sensations and catastrophize. All of this is interconnected. More fear means more avoidance of the things you fear, in particular, using your injured body parts and just generally being physically active. Like I said, avoidance of activity leads to disuse, which increases our deconditioning, our depression, and our perception of our own disability. All of this filters back into our pain experience, making it even more painful and distressing. And then we restart the negative cycle again, even worse. However, like I said, there is a way out of this vicious cycle. Instead of turning left with high fear, We need to find a way to turn right, to have low fear. The first thing to do is to understand that hurt does not equal harm. Pain does not equal damage. With chronic pain, when you have pain, that sensation of pain often no longer indicates any damage is being done, right? So you got low back pain, for example, and you're injured 10 years ago, and you're sitting on the couch, and you try to get up off the couch, and oh, your low back hurts really bad. So in that moment, is something ripping or tearing in your back? Is there a bone breaking or a nerve being cut? No, there really isn't. The nerves in your back have become sensitized through this process of chronic pain. So that's why we say that chronic pain is like a fire alarm or smoke alarm that won't go off, even though there's no more fire, right? So you imagine a smoke alarm where it just goes off every single time there's a little bit of smoke or you're making toast. Right? That's not a useful alarm. It's going off all the time. It's very annoying, even for the smallest thing. And that's exactly how our body is reacting to pain, right? So our nervous system becomes more sensitive and just literally fires more pain signals, sends more pain signals to our brain because it's more sensitive. So what we have to understand is just because we're feeling pain with chronic pain doesn't mean we're damaging our body. I could tell you this all day. I could have 20 lectures on it, but I know that knowledge is not enough. You can't be lectured into understanding this. You really have to experience it for yourself, live it for yourself, and that's how you actually change your beliefs. In other words, you have to find ways to become active and prove to yourself, show to yourself that, I can go for a walk. It doesn't lead to being more disabled. I can lift some weights, maybe. They may not be, 30 pounds, but I can still do something. You have to be active and realize that your pain doesn't lead to further harm repeatedly over time. You have to repeatedly realize activity is okay. And an important part of recovery is challenging yourself to become active again despite being in pain and not letting that fear of more pain or re-injury stop you from getting active again. The way to do this is to slowly increase the amount of activity and exercise because if you go too far too fast, you're just going to get a flare up. And you're just going to feel, what's the point of this? I'm just getting flared up. You get very discouraged and maybe give up the activity. So that's what we got to do. Slow and steady wins the race in this case. And we have to, in a very graded way, step by step, increase the activity, increase the weight, and so on. Of course, part of this process is making sure that our thinking is not too negative, not too fear-based, not too catastrophic. That is on this diagram, we see it goes from that low fear to confrontation. In this diagram, confrontation is the opposite of avoidance, right? So normally we see a treadmill and we turn the other way and avoid it. What we want is to have low fear and to confront it, to approach the treadmill, to approach activity instead of running away. In other words, we can confront the issue and take proactive steps to get stronger and healthier and begin our path toward recovery. All right, so what do we talk about today? So pain is not just physical, it is biopsychosocial. It is physical, mental, emotional, and social all together. In particular, our thoughts, our feelings, and actions all affect one another. So if we're having negative thoughts, we're going to have negative feelings and unhealthy actions. If we can change our thoughts, we can change our feelings and our actions for the better. We know that if we have a lot of negative beliefs about pain that are based in fear, we're going to have fear avoidance. We're going to be avoiding anything thought to cause possible pain or re-entry. And we know that's exactly what we need to do to get better, is to get active again and to use our injured body part rather than just avoiding and guarding it. Catastrophizing is when we think of the worst possible scenario of our pain sensations. It's a particular type of negative thought that we all have at times, but it specifically when applied to your pain, that is when problems start. If we have increased fear, we have increased hypervigilance, which is when we overly pay attention to our own pain sensations. Those pain beliefs, the catastrophizing, and all the hypervigilance, all of that combines to increase our avoidance, which leads to deconditioning. And our body falls apart slowly, gets weaker and stiffer. Depression, such as low mood and lack of motivation, and disability, basically just overall worsening our pain experience, worsening our quality of life. That's why we have to challenge our negative fear-based beliefs, while we have to challenge our catastrophizing in order to become active again. We have to make sure our negative thoughts, negative beliefs aren't stopping us from getting active to get strength and functionality back. And that's it. So, a little bit of a briefer class today, but thank you guys for listening. Any